Hi everybody. Thanks for coming to our launch event for the new report that's been authored between Greater Manchester Poverty Action and Just Fair, called The Socio-Economic Duty in Action: Case Studies from England and Wales. Thanks for giving up your evening to listen to what we've got to say. Just before we begin, I'll just let everybody know that this session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen on a recording, please do keep your cameras off. And if you did want to make any comment or anything, please use the Q&A box, just so that it doesn't all get crowded in here. So as I said, this event is to launch the latest report that's been co-authored between GMPA and Just Fair. The report was launched today at midday, and hopefully at some point this evening my colleague Penny will pop a link to the report in the group chat, so if you haven't seen it yet you can access it. Okay. So first of all, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming. For those that don't know me, my name's Laura Burgess. I'm Senior Policy and Researcher Advisor at Greater Manchester Poverty Action. I'll just explain a brief bit about GMPA and Just Fair before we properly start, for those that might not be familiar. Bear with me 1 second, sorry, I'm just going to admit people in the waiting room. There we go. So first, the Greater Manchester Poverty Action. We're a not-for-profit organisation that works to prevent and reduce poverty across Greater Manchester and beyond. We do this in 3 ways: through our research, policy and advocacy work, through our direct programmes delivery, and through running the Greater Manchester Living Wage campaign. Our colleagues at Just Fair, they're a human rights organisation, and they work to bring social justice and human rights together by championing economic, social and cultural rights in the UK. And both GMPA and Just Fair are part of the One for Equality campaign, which is an organisation of various different organisations from across the UK that are working together to campaign for the socio-economic duty to be brought into law in England, and failing that, for its voluntary adoption by public authorities in England. And this piece of work has come out of that campaign and the relationship that we have between GMPA and Just Fair. So the report has been authored primarily by our colleagues Anna Lopez from Greater Manchester Poverty Action and Megan Isaac from Just Fair. Now, neither Anna nor Megan actually work for these organisations anymore. Now, that isn't as a result of this piece of work. I feel like I need to make that clear. They were both working with us on a short-term basis, and both organisations would just like to express our thanks to them for the great job that they've done in bringing this report together. It's a really useful and important piece of work, so thanks very much to Megan and Anna. So I'm just going to share the agenda. So introductions from me, that's where we're up to. Next, I'm going to pass over to Anna. As I've just said, she's going to give us a bit of a background to the socio-economic duty and why this report is needed. Sorry, I'm just still admitting people from the waiting room. Next up will be Megan, and Megan will give us an overview of the report and what we've learned from it. We're then really pleased to have 2 of the case studies that contributed to the report speaking with us tonight. So Mo Jogi, who is Head of Culture and Transformation at Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service. Mo will be sharing reflections from the Fire and Rescue Service there. And Shari Bowes, who is Principal Policy Officer for Poverty and Inequalities from Salford City Council, and she'll be sharing Salford City Council's approach and journey with the socio-economic duty. Sorry, just another person in the waiting room. Finally, we'll be then having a Q&A session, and we're very glad to be joined by Helen Flynn from Just Fair for the Q&A session, and then Helen's going to conclude this session and share some reflections. Okay, so in terms of the objectives then of both this report and this evening's session, firstly, the key objective is sharing awareness of the socio-economic duty and raising awareness of it in both the report and this session. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the duty, but for those that aren't, hopefully you will learn about it tonight. To share examples of real world good practice to promote the benefits of adopting the duty. Often in our work, when we're advocating for adoption of the duty, we're asked, well, what does it mean in practice? So this this report really aims to fill that gap. And then finally, for participants of this session who members of local authorities and public bodies, we'd really like to encourage adoption of the duty. And finally, as part of the One for Equality campaign, we do aim to influence national policy making as well. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Anna, who is going to share the background to the report. And Anna, if you want me to click through the slides, please just let me know. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. So as Laura said, my name is Anna Lopez. I was a policy and research assistant at Greater Manchester Poverty Action, and I worked with Megan and Isaac from Just Fair on this report. I'm going to talk a little bit about the need for the report and kind of the impetus around creating it. But first, I want to backtrack a little bit and quickly kind of give a brief introduction to the socio-economic duty and also discuss the level of implementation across the UK thus far. Next slide, please. So the socio-economic duty is a requirement for public bodies to adopt transparent and effective measures to address inequalities that result from differences in occupation, education, place of residence, and social class, with the intention of reducing socioeconomic disadvantage. Next slide, please. The socioeconomic duty derives from Section 1 of the Equality Act 2010, where it was included. However, successive governments in the UK failed to commence this section of the Equality Act, and as a result, this isn't the socioeconomic duty isn't a requirement for public bodies in the UK. Because of the failure of the UK governments to adopt the socioeconomic duty, Scotland and Wales have both gone ahead independently in adopting the socioeconomic duty. In Scotland, it's the Fairer Scotland duty, and was implemented in 2018. In Wales, it's known as the socio-economic duty and was adopted in 2021. Next slide, please. In addition to Welsh and Scottish implementation of the socio-economic duty, other public bodies in England have also voluntarily started adopting the socio-economic duty. So in 2021, Greater Manchester Poverty Action conducted a survey of councils in England to see kind of levels of adoption, and found that 1 in 7 councils had voluntarily adopted the socio-economic duty. In addition, more than half of councils are already acting in the spirit of the duty by considering socio-economic disadvantage inequality impact assessments, and also in kind of strategic decision-making and policy decisions. Adoption of the socio-economic duty is highest in London, the North East and the North West, and this tends to roughly correlate with increased levels of poverty in areas that have adopted the duty, although this obviously isn't a perfect match. It's worth saying here that this research was conducted in 2021, and we're hopeful that more councils will have adopted the duty since then, and indeed we know of some that have. In addition, it's not just councils that have adopted the socio-economic duty. Other statutory bodies have adopted and have done brilliant work with the socio-economic duty, as we'll see kind of in a minute with Mo from Merseyside Fire and Rescue. But this research primarily focused on councils. Next slide, please. So at GMPA and at Just Fair, we believe that the socio-economic duty will provide a powerful foundation for a fairer society. And as Laura mentioned, that's kind of why we've encouraged adoption of the socio-economic duty, including creating a practical guide for implementing the socio-economic duty, which I think Penny has linked in the chat, but will also be on the further resources section of the report. So if anyone kind of thinks that might be relevant to them, I'd really recommend checking that out. But we also recognise that adoption of the socio-economic duty very much isn't the end of the line. What's important is kind of how it's implemented. And at the moment, there's a lack of resources to help organisations make the most of the socio-economic duty. And I think that both GMPA and Just Fair have received kind of queries around how the socio-economic duty can be best used. In addition, I think me and Megan both found that when we're conducting the research, there were some organisations that had or were in the process of implementing the socio-economic duty, but weren't yet sure how they could make the most use of it. And the intention of this report is to kind of fill that gap and enable organisations to make the best use of the socio-economic duty that they can. Next slide, please. So the report really tries to answer kind of these questions of how can the duty be used on a day-to-day basis in a really practical way, and what can the duty achieve? And to do that, we've used practical examples of different case studies from across the UK to try and really illustrate different ways that different organisations kind of with very diverse responsibilities can use the duty. And to discuss kind of that a little bit more and a slightly more in-depth version of the case studies, I'd like to pass over to Megan Isaac from Just Fair. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan. I worked at Just Fair as their research and policy intern for about 6 months from January. So I worked with Anna on creating this report. So I'm just going to give a little overview of some of the case studies and what the structure of the report looked like, and then a few of the kind of more general lessons learned, taking everything together. Can I have the next slide, please? So the overview of the report, really, we had 7 case studies from across England and Wales. You can kind of see the geographical spread of them in this map on the right here. And they really demonstrate the varied and powerful ways that the duty is being used to tackle inequalities of outcome that stem from socioeconomic disadvantage. And across the case studies, we've seen positive impacts in a range of areas, including in employment practices, COVID-19 responses, school meal price freezes, and cost of living crisis support. Can I have the next slide, please? One of the really key areas which we saw the duty making a positive impact was in decision making during crises. So whether that was COVID-19 or the cost of living crisis, or potentially any future crises we face in the UK, often decision making is highly pressured, and having the duty in place really embeds considerations of socioeconomic disadvantage and poverty right from the beginning, rather than being something retrospective to be fitted afterwards. And so there's a couple of case studies that really demonstrated this clearly for us. So the first one was Hackney Council, who voluntarily adopted the duty with the Equality Act kind of as originally drafted before the UK government didn't implement it. And so having had this long term, Hackney really recognised that COVID-19 wasn't just a health crisis, but it was also about poverty and socioeconomic disadvantage. So immediately after the first wave of COVID, they conducted an equality review, which really centred socioeconomic disadvantage and its intersectional impacts. And this led to the formation of a huge frontline response through the Community Partnerships Network, which provided a lot of support throughout Hackney. And there were some really positive outcomes from this. So over 3,000 meals provided per week, over 600 welfare calls were made, and 2,500 volunteers were deployed. Next slide, please. And so the second case study where we really saw this decision-making at a different scale was through the Welsh Government, who also during COVID used an integrated impact assessment, which embedded the socioeconomic duty into their decision-making and identified that the majority of social care workers experience significant socioeconomic disadvantage. So this led them to launching the COVID-19 statutory sick pay enhancement scheme, which provided financial support to social care workers throughout the pandemic. And so overall, this was £10 million provided over 22 months, which supported an estimated 18,000 full-time equivalent social care workers. And it wasn't just limited to this time during the pandemic, it's also led to some longer term changes to really looking at how the working conditions for the social care workforce can be improved. So they've now set up a forum to look into this, which is looking at things such as the living wage for social care workers in Wales. Next slide, please. So another area which we again saw the duty having really positive impacts was in employment practices, really encouraging organisations to look at whether people from disadvantaged backgrounds aren't being as represented in their recruitment processes. So Merseyside is a really good example of this and one of our really clear case studies. So we're really lucky to have Mo with us speaking after to go into a bit more detail. But after adopting the duty in 2021, Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service reviewed their recruitment practices and identified that individuals experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage were underrepresented in firefighter applications. So this led to the removal of the requirement to hold a driving licence to make this more accessible, and the introduction of a driving licence bursary for successful applicants from 20 deprived areas of Merseyside. And already this has had some really clear and positive outcomes. So there were 195 extra applications in 2022, 48% of which were from the 10% most deprived areas of Merseyside. Next slide, please. Similarly, again, for employment, I won't go into too much detail just for time's sake, but North of Tyne Combined Authority again reviewed their recruitment practices, and that's led to some quite significant changes for them. So they've removed as many degree requirements as possible, or they're asking for equivalent experience if it's necessary to have that level of experience. And this has really been complemented by internal training to ensure that staff members who are writing job adverts aren't asking for unnecessary qualifications, And one of the really core parts, which has been really central for North of Tyne, has been embedding equality into all of their job adverts. So not just as an equality statement at the bottom, but really making it clear to potential applicants that equality is something that they value, and they really value the diversity of their workforce. And they've had some really positive feedback from applicants who have said that that made the difference to them applying. And a final thing that they've done there is they've encouraged applicants from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds to consider more senior roles, which they might not have originally considered themselves for. And they've again had people come and be successful in those applications for more senior roles. Next slide, please. So this was just 2 examples of the lessons that we've seen, but there's plenty more which I think are captured in the other case studies I've not discussed today. So one of them is really prompting further engagement with people with lived experience of poverty and socioeconomic disadvantage through the kind of evidence collecting process of completing these equalities reports. It also really enhances that and encourages that. Secondly is encouraging an exploration of how socioeconomic disadvantage intersects with other axes of discrimination. And so it's quite clear in the example for Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, for example, that the driving licence bursary doesn't only make firefighter roles more accessible for people experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage, but also other potentially marginalised groups who are less likely to have a driving licence. So, for example, people from ethnic minority backgrounds or women. And finally, the socioeconomic duty, by really kind of drawing focus in, promotes a collaborative approach to tackling socioeconomic disadvantage across organisations and across regions. Next slide, please. So finally, just a quick summary of some of the lessons that we've learned. As Anna already mentioned, we did face a couple of challenges conducting the research. So a lot of people hadn't heard of the duty, and some of those who had didn't really know yet how best to use it, particularly authorities who are in the early stages of adoption. So I think for me and Anna, that really demonstrated the need for some positive case studies to spark some further dialogue, which is kind of building on the work for the One for Equality campaign already. So we're glad that it's kind of filling a gap in that way. And the report has really found that the duty can be used across a range of scales and sectors to tackle inequalities, and really complements other equalities legislation and work that's already being done. And I think the most exciting thing is we don't really know yet all of the ways that the duty can be used. So it'll be really exciting to see how this develops, and hopefully this is just one step in the conversation to see what else the duty can do. Thanks. I think now I'm passing over to Mo to talk a bit more about Merseyside Fire and Rescue Services work with the duty.
Thanks so much, Megan. Mo, would you like me to stop sharing so that you can share your screen? Nope, is that okay? You tell me when to click on it. You're just on mute, Mo, so do you want to take yourself off? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invite today. I'm really pleased to share with you some of our insights, some reflections in terms of our work around the socio-economic duty. Some of the reflection will very much focus on, and you won't be surprised in terms of some of the processes that we've implemented. But I'm also going to focus on some of the relationships that we've had to build, and with internally and externally, and also share with you some of the outcomes. And already Megan shared our case study around the work around the driving license. I've got to stress we're very much at the start of our journey, and we're really looking to ensure over the next 12 months we want to be in a position where we can report consistently on some of the things that we've done, but also in terms of the action, what impact it's having. Next slide, please. Okay, so before I go into how we and why we adopted the socio-economic duty, I just wanted to share with you in terms of our story, in terms of what Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service are about, and we were really keen to ensure that the duty fitted in very much around our story. And when we developed our story, I've highlighted here the 3 clear mentions around community. So we really wanted to really get close to our community, and what we thought was in terms of the socio-economic duty provided us with that vehicle, that tool to get to know our community even more. Next slide, please. And at the same time, I think one of the things that I wanted to stress was we've got very much a mindset at Mersey Fire and Rescue Service in terms of trying something new, and this is very much our leadership message, and we're really keen to ensure that the socio-economic duty didn't we didn't want that the socio-economic duty to be seeing something in the corner. We very much wanted to see very much integral part of our vision and also our purpose, but also in terms of our commitment to protecting the most vulnerable, but also use it as a tool to look at ways of reducing inequalities. So this is why it was so important that the conversations that we had internally very much fitted in with our leadership message, our vision, our purpose, what we're about, etc. We're keen to make sure that it was very much integrated into very much what we call business as usual. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so one of the first things we did was what we wanted to do was clearly articulate and agree why we were adopting a socio-economic duty. And we came up with 3 clear areas that why we wanted to focus on the socio-economic duty. One was that very much around building on the progress in terms of Scotland and Wales, around looking at socio-economic issues a lot more in a systemic way, integrated way, and our work around deprivation, fuel poverty, etc., housing and community empowerment. It gave us very much a focus around not looking at things in silo, but a lot more from an integrated point of view. And I think Megan mentioned this earlier as well. The second reason was very much the evidence, and our evidence was quite clear in terms of the link between fatalities in accidental dwelling fires and the role that unfortunately deprivation plays. And then thirdly, we wanted to link our work around socio-economic duty around being an anchor organisation in terms of from an employment perspective. We employ 1,000 people over something in the region of about 28, 29 different business units, different sites across Merseyside. So we wanted to use it, that reach as an opportunity to really encourage people to see their employment careers at Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service. Next slide, please. Okay. So in terms of the how, so over the last 12, 18 months, we've really focused on 4 areas that I'm just going to very briefly go through. One has been around leadership, finding a framework that can help in terms of our journey. Thirdly, really devolving responsibility around socio-economic duty to the business units and you've seen it as business as usual. And then thirdly, very much around reporting progress. These were the areas that we picked up from the work that's already been undertaken by the EHRC and their evaluation of the implementation in Wales and Scotland. So that was really helpful. Next slide, please. So leadership right from the outset was very, very important. So when I started my role nearly 18 months ago, the Chief Fire Officer made it quite clear that he wanted to make sure that the socio-economic duty was implemented locally, but also he took up a leadership role in terms of our close working with the Liverpool City region, so and encouraging other local authorities to also consider adopting the socio-economic duty. We also made sure that other senior leadership members and in particular departmental functional heads were also on board with the duty, and that it didn't solely stay with myself or in this case the Chief Fire Officer. Next slide, please. So the next role was we'd got the leadership on board. We then thought, how do we best find a framework that's easy to understand, that fits in very much in line with our focus. So we adopted the Liverpool City Region Cost of Living Index, which looks at income and employment, housing and energy and fuel. And what we were able to do was we were able to identify 20 high-risk areas. And what we were able to do was we then linked that up with our 13 community fire stations. So imagine them as 13 business units. And what this allowed us to do was to focus specific action and really implement the socio-economic duty using these high-risk areas and focusing activities around 13 community fire stations. So what we've done in terms of this action was around ensuring that whether it's our activities around prevention, protection, so this both means in terms of residential housing, but also in terms of looking at how we support businesses, but also looking at from an employment factor, we are now starting to develop activities around these 13 key areas across these 20 high risk areas. So giving us a real focus on where we can sort of like see and measure the impact of the socio-economic duty over the next 12 months. Next areas. Next slide, sorry. So as I mentioned, we've aligned our priorities with our work around prevention, protection, but also our work around employment, linking it up with the cost of living index. We've also done some work internally. So we've got a cost of living working group that's externally facing, and this has been mentioned earlier. So a work around supporting deprived communities across Merseyside. But also, we've also taken a focus around asking staff and the impact of the cost of living, and we've set up a staff network as well. And thirdly, we have had a long history of addressing the socio-economic duty as part of our equality impact assessment, equality analysis. So that's been long part of our business planning cycle. So one of the things that we have done over the last 12 months has included implementing some quality management within that framework to really embed how we actually design and implement services. And then finally, we're now in a position now, we feel now that we've rolled out the socio-economic duty across the different functions, we're confident by next March we'll be in a position for the first time to actually report on the impact of the socio-economic duty. Next slide, please. So finally, Megan's already mentioned our work around driving licenses and how we've been able to attract more applicants, and in particular from deprived areas. And just to give you an example, 3 weeks ago, I was on a recruitment panel, and two of the highest scoring candidates were from one of the most deprived areas in Merseyside, and both didn't have a driving license. And to be in a position to offer them a role, it's very, very powerful. And I think that's the impact and potential impact of the socio-economic duty on a human level, as well as from a process perspective. So overall, I think we've next slide, please. I think overall, I think our next focus now is for the next 12 months is very much to embed that leadership, continue testing the framework, building that capacity to ensure that managers at all level feel comfortable around socio-economic duty. So one of the things that we've been doing recently is as part of the selection process for the area manager role, we had a specific question around how would you use the socio-economic duty to embed into your function, so and that was really useful in terms of some of the ideas they had. And then finally, together with case studies, but also reporting in terms of both process and from an outcome perspective, that'll be a key focus for us over the next 12 months. So thank you for listening, and happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mo. It's really great to hear about the socio-economic duty in action, as our report's called. It's really powerful, I think, for other organisations that are considering adopting the duty to to hear about how it has really been put into place in an organisation. So thank you. I'm now going to invite Shari Bose to speak. Shari is a great friend of Greater Manchester Poverty Action. She's Principal Policy Officer for Poverty and Inequality at Salford City Council. And Shari's going to share her reflections from Salford on the duty. Shari, did you want me to let you screen share?
If you're okay, Laura, I don't mind just if you do it. Is that okay?
I'm happy to do so. Yeah, you go ahead, Sherry. Thank you.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Laura, and thank you to Greater Manchester Poverty Action and Just Fair for having me here as a representative of Salford City Council tonight. And also a big thanks to Mo. That was actually incredible to hear what Merseyside have done. Some of that stuff, particularly around the driving licences, was absolutely fascinating. And wow, yeah, I'm really, really blown away about how the SED in practice has went along there. So thank you so much for that. So as Laura mentioned, my name's Shari. I'm the Principal Policy Officer for Poverty and Inequality over at Salford City Council, and I'm here tonight to just give a little talking a bit of context about how we went about voluntarily implementing the socio-economic duty here at Salford City Council. So just really briefly, for those that don't know, I'll give a really brief background context into Salford. I'm sure that anybody here from other local authority areas, it's going to sound eerily similar to what's going on. So Salford, you know, a lot of the times we talk about a tale of two cities, like I say, as I'm sure a lot of local authorities that are here tonight will say about their own areas. And by that, what I mean is that over the past couple of decades, we've seen major economic regeneration within the city. We've got rapid population growth, particularly in younger age groups. We're actually the fastest growing population in the northwest of England, according to the latest census results. But as well as all these good news stories and this amazing tales of economic regeneration, etc., we also have, as every other local authority will know, a lot of socio-economic inequalities and health inequalities. Salford's ranked 19th most deprived area according to the Index of Multiple Deprivation. So that idea of the tale of two cities, what that really means and why one of the big levers for us in going about implementing the socio-economic duty was really to reckon with that inequality of outcome that we see within our city. And so we can really consider those differences that we see between those that experience socio-economic disadvantage and those who don't. So it's really about having and ensuring that we've got that really strong anti-poverty thread embedded throughout all our work that we're doing throughout the council, whether that's our services or strategic decisions and priorities for the socio-economic duty. Laura, do you mind going on to the first slide, please? Thank you so much. So in terms of the actual implementation, there's two major factors I just really want to briefly touch on when it came to voluntarily implementing that duty. The first one was the formation of the first Salford Poverty Truth Commission way back in 2016, which feels like a lifetime ago now. And for anyone here that doesn't know what a Poverty Truth Commission is, it's this really innovative way of bringing together people from the community with lived experience with what we call public life commissioners, people that are able to influence decisions from the likes of the public, voluntary and private sector, and bringing everyone together over a certain period of time to look at how we can implement decisions and innovative solutions to poverty within our area. So the first Poverty Truth Commission, in terms of the council's context, had a lot of major outcomes. It really shaped a lot of the council's aims and priorities going forward. But one of the major ones I just wanted to briefly touch on that came from that Poverty Truth Commission was the way in which we realised that council tax and council tax collection and recovery was how this was influencing the people of Salford, and how we wanted to sort of shape those outcomes to ensure that we were having the best outcome for people experience socioeconomic disadvantage when we had people's lived experiences within that policy formulation of council tax collection. So it had a big impact on this, and what was some of the major outcomes that came from working with the Poverty Truth Commission for council tax was a couple of outcomes, including stopping the use of enforcement agents when recovering debts from the most vulnerable people, launching face-to-face sessions to give advice and help for people in debt. Also, we wanted to rewrite our standardised letters that we send out. So rather than having those brown envelopes dropping onto the letterbox that can cause a lot of people anxiety, we rewrote that approach and made it a much more holistic and wraparound support with referrals into other key services, and also given full council tax exemptions for Salford care leavers. So I just wanted to mention that as a really major example of one of the ways in which we were sort of considering socioeconomic issues within the city, but why it was also a real lever is why we wanted to have a formalised process in place. And just really briefly, whilst all that was going on, we were also refreshing our Tackling Poverty Strategy, which was released in March 2021. Obviously, a very different time when we started writing it after what was been going on for the past year by that point. But within this, we also made a really big key commitment to implementing the socio-economic duty within the council. And I just wanted to briefly touch as well within these slides on one of the links that we make within using socio-economic duty and what socio-economic disadvantage mean to us with our own definition of poverty, which I've put up here right at the bottom. And really the reason I've highlighted this, and we sort of highlight this within all our training sessions we do on the socio-economic duty, is to show that we want to make sure that anti-poverty agendas are embedded within all our processes, and it isn't just about that idea of basic essentials and meeting that. It's about having dignity and respect, incorporating that whole community view and co-production within all your policies and processes. Next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. So that was sort of the decisions as to why we decided to voluntarily implement the socio-economic duty. But in terms of going about practically implementing, as Anna and Megan have touched on as well within their report, you know, there can be sometimes a bit of a dearth of information when it comes to practical examples for the SED. So we wanted to take a really methodical approach and not just go in really, really quickly in case it didn't work out in case it ended up basically being a tick box exercise. We wanted to really make sure that services were really, really interacting with the socio-economic duty within all our policy and decision-making processes. So what we really did was we went into the implementation shaped by some of these core aims that I've put up here. And really that was about, some of them was building an evidence base, we said, on socio-economic inequality. And by that, we really meant ensuring we had really rich research, both quantitative and qualitative, to help inform services when they were going in to consider the socio-economic duty and what it would mean for their own policies. We really, really emphasised that we wanted to make sure it was at every stage of the policy making process. And from that, really just mean it's not an add-on at the end. It's not something that you do simply to tick a box, but it's going right from policy design and where possible, where you're creating your aims and objectives right from the very start. You're considering socio-economic disadvantage and inequality of outcome. We also had an aim to ensure and encourage our services were really co-designing their policies alongside communities with lived experience. Again, going back to that Poverty Truth Commission example, and of course, really crucially, keeping the process as simple and as streamlined as possible. So within that, when we went in with those core aims, as I said, we did this in a very methodical way. And I just want to give a really quick practical example for any local authorities out there that are considering the socio-economic duty. So for us, a big example of that was wondering whether to amalgamate it into our existing equality impact assessment process or to have a separate socio-economic duty assessment process. So for us, one of the ways that we went about looking at this was to interact with services, look at what worked best for them, look at what worked best with our current evidence base, and we came to the decision that it was best to amalgamate it into the EIA process. Not saying that that works for everyone, but for us, that was definitely what we thought was the right decision, mainly because it avoided duplication. And also a really key big bonus we thought was it was allowing us really rich intersectional analysis and making sure that was there as deep and as high quality as possible. So next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. So that was the sort of core aims that we went when we were working out how to implement the socio-economic duty. But when we actually went to put this in practice, what we did was created a dedicated socio-economic duty toolkit for our corporation, again, to really, really fundamentally put down that this wasn't just a tick box exercise. So within that toolkit, we had three main things. We had a supporting SED framework that went along with our current equality impact assessment process. And that was really what we call a roadmap, which just gave prompts for every bit of the policy making process as to how services could look at how they could consider the socio-economic duty. We also provided some guidance with some specific examples of socio-economic inequality. I think both Anna and Megan and Mo also touched on this, that it's also not always just geographical. When we talk about socio-economic inequality, we also need to consider intersectionality. We need to consider different marginalised communities. And really, really importantly as well, we implemented an interactive training programme over a number of months. And what we really did with that was put into practice a series of training sessions across the organisation, and we combined an introduction to the duty as well as a refresh on how to make the best use of the inequality impact assessment process to tackle inequality. So next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. And just talking about that training, I just really wanted to quickly mention a few key features in that, as whenever we talk about the duty, it seems to be the thing that's highlighted the most in terms of practical implementation. So as I mentioned, we rolled out training sessions across the City Council, which turned out to be very, very popular. We ended up actually having to put on more over a number of months due to demand for them, which was really, really great. So this combined theory and interactive elements to train members across the organisation on how to consider socio-economic inequality. And what I should say in that, and one of the key things that we did flag up when we were rolling the training out, was our services already, as Mo's touched on, really prioritised socio-economic inequality. So we really also made sure that we were highlighting that this was just another little step in the process to what they were already doing when they were prioritising all that anti-poverty agenda. Another thing we really did with the training, as I mentioned, was to translate that into the Salford context, made sure we were giving Salford specific examples, and really want to stress the importance of the process as a whole with equality impact assessments rather than just being seen as an add-on. And we also rolled out a modified version of this training for elected members with a focus on scrutiny, which again was a really, really great practical example of the socio-economic duty in process. And just to finish up, how we also implemented this was through what we called a soft launch period. And really, this was just to allow the council to build up their evidence base and not put the duty in too quickly, so that services knew what they were doing. And then we followed that up with a really robust evaluation period. And following that evaluation, we're currently revising our guidance even further now to amalgamate that even more with our newly realised commitment that we've now got within Salford City Council to recognise cares for children and cares experienced young people within our impact assessment process. So final slide, please, Laura. Thank you. And I just wanted to really briefly, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, talk about the benefits of adopting the socio-economic duty for organisations that are here today. For us, it's been a really, really great way to highlight how we consider socio-economic inequality, and also providing that idea of monitoring the impact of all our policies and decisions. I would also really highlight that it can also help in the future by bringing up potentially negative impacts that might come up, not right now, but might be happening in the future, and really provide a timely response to them, and just providing that real-time evidence of how we're really positively working to prioritise poverty and inequality. And I think I'd just really, really like to finish by saying the biggest impact for myself and my colleagues and seeing it work in the council in terms of incorporating the duty has been seeing the really, really keen way that our services have always been working with communities, but sharing that best practice of socio-economic consideration and really seeing how the services work together in tackling poverty and inequality and taking that real intersectional approach when considering socio-economic disadvantage. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Shari. That was really, really great. And you know, at GMPA, we definitely recognise that Salford City Council are leading the way across Greater Manchester with adoption of the socio-economic duty. So it's really good that you were able to share that with us. And thanks again to Mo for sharing the reflections from Merseyside. I'm going to open it up now to questions. If any participants have any questions, you can either raise a hand or you can pop it in the chat. I'm just going to go to Elaine M. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, and maybe if you wanted to just direct who it's for, so you can ask a question of Shari, Mo, Anna, Megan, and we also have Helen Flynn from Just Fair as well. So Elaine, if you'd like to go first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think it was yourself, Laura, or it might have been Mo, who talked about identifying staff who are from disadvantaged socio-economic backgrounds in order to target them for senior management positions. I just wondered, how do you target staff from disadvantaged socio-economic backgrounds? What are the inputs in order to get the outcome you want?
I think it was Mo actually. I know that this has been discussed in the report, so I would urge everyone to go and read the report. Mo, if you want to come in, I think it was Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service that have set up a group for staff that have experienced socioeconomic disadvantage. Would you like to elaborate on that, Mo, please?
Yeah, so we've just recently, I think it's a few months old, set up a staff network to look at the impact of the cost of living, first of all. But secondly, what we want to know, and this is very much at the start of this process, is we want to get to that stage where we want to ask staff in terms of what their journey has been, especially from the age of 14. Yeah. So we're trying to formulate how best we ask those questions. But some of the questions we may ask is something along the lines of, when you were 14 and at school, did you enjoy? Did you have free dinners, for example? Has any member of staff, has any family members been to university, etc.? Because we just want to see where people, where their journey has started, and if we are, targeting families, communities, where we should be. But it's very much at the start of that process. We want to work with our staff network internally to formulate those questions to get an idea in terms of what their journey has been. But we'll have to do that.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up then. Is that data recorded on staff records, as in the same way as other demographic data?
As in the socio-economic? Not at the moment. Not at the moment we are, but we are in the process of trying to find a way of best doing that. I'm not sure. Maybe that's been recorded at some other organisation, but I'm not sure. But it's going to be part of our planning process to look at how that's done in other organisations.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Elaine, for that question. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen because it might just be a little bit easier for everybody to see who's speaking if that suits, but you're very welcome to remain on camera off if that suits you better. I'm going to go to Alison D next, who's got a question. I probably should have said if you want to introduce the organisation that you're from as well, if that's appropriate. Thanks, Alison.
Hi everybody, I'm Alison Dunn. I'm with Gateshead Council and my question is for Salford Council. You gave us a very, very thorough overview of how you've done that. I feel like I've got a blueprint now to take that forward, but the obvious question is how much resource have you allocated to this? Because right now this is me and I'm wondering how practical that is. So I'm very interested to understand how much capacity has been required to take this from an idea to actually being able to implement it.
Thanks, Alison. That's a great question. I should probably start by saying that I'm in a very, very lucky position at Salford City Council within my job role, because I don't know many other councils that have a poverty and inequality policy officer. So when I came into my role, that was one of the main objectives of it. So we kind of already had that capacity built into that job. But as well as that, within the sort of team that gives guidance and supports our quality impact assessments, they were obviously given training as well on the socio-economic duty. So they're there to support and give guidance to services, but obviously we want services to be doing that themselves and using their own expertise in policy making. So I hope that kind of helps, Alison, in terms of capacity. I think if maybe working at an organisation where, like you say, maybe it's only yourself, I think the really, really key thing is just ensuring that training is there for the services, making sure there's like really, really good leadership. I think that's really key. And I think Mo touched on that as well in his presentation, because that was a big thing, I think, in influencing services to really get involved and really get enthusiastic about the socio-economic duty, was having that political and corporate support. So I hope that helps.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, which is a bit greedy of me, but does all of this stuff come across your desk, and do you have the opportunity to say, well, actually, I don't think you've gone far enough? And if it's not coming across your desk, who's doing that? Because certainly there are parts of Gateshead Council where I can see that we are absolutely operating within the spirit of this duty already, and this will go down very easily. But there are other parts where I think, it will be much harder for them to draw the line. So who is it that's saying, well, actually, you've not gone far enough there? Is that the job of the leadership or? Is it coming across your desk?
Yeah, I think there's a part for different parts to play. As I said, within the training, we purposely as well did a tailored version for members, and that was really to highlight their role within the scrutiny function. So if something is going for decision, the members can highlight, has this went far enough? Have you considered the socioeconomic inequality issues? But again, within the team we have a team that gives support on equality impact assessments and concurrently the socio-economic duty now. So it could come across mine, it could come across one of any of them. And I realise now I feel like I'm in a very, very lucky position, obviously, with the capacity that has been rolled out there. But yeah, like I say, we purposely do, and we really, really stress that the services should be doing this as using their own expertise. Because like you say, Alison, you're one person, you could not do that for the whole council and be able to monitor that. So I think that's when the training is really, really key, both for services and for elected members.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
No worries.
Thanks, Alison, for your question. I think Shari and Mo are going to be in demand for sort of consultancy work on adopting the socio-economic duty after this, because you both did such great presentations. So thanks for that. There's lots of questions coming in. One that I'm going to put towards Anna and Megan is regarding the analysis of the local authorities and other public bodies. There's a question come from Liz Robinson. For organisations that have adopted it or working in the spirit of it, is this across the political spectrum? Is that something that either of you two can answer? I know that Penny from GMPA has commented as well. Anna, did you want to go first?
Yeah, so if you're referring to research that I kind of mentioned about the 1 in 7 councils, for example, yeah, the research shows it is across the political spectrum. They're both Labour and Tory controlled councils have done it. The rate of considering socioeconomic disadvantage and equality impact assessments is roughly the same between councils. However, formally adopting the socioeconomic duty is more likely among Labour councils. I think about 20% of Labour councils surveyed had formally adopted the duty, compared to about 10% of Conservative councils. So there's a little bit of a political difference, but it is pretty much across the spectrum.
Thanks, Anna. Megan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't think so. I think most of the case studies that we've got, obviously the Welsh case study was a national level one, but I think most of them were Labour. I think Harborough has like a no overall control council. I think it's a coalition between the Lib Dems and the Greens and potentially Labour there. But I think the Harborough case study was quite a good example because it was one where they didn't have particularly high levels of socioeconomic disadvantage in their area, but found that when the cost of living crisis came, there were people experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage for the first time, and their main resource was putting out support for people who hadn't been in touch with support services before, who may not have experienced this before. So I think that's probably a good case study to look at for a bit of a different one there.
Thanks, Megan. And I think possibly just to sort of round off Liz's question there, is that some of the organisations that have adopted the duty or may adopt the duty are apolitical organisations such as Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service. Another one of the case studies that is in the report is Transport for Greater Manchester, so it isn't just a specific political issue, it is an issue that sort of transcends the public sector. I'm just going to come to another question now from Holly Harwood. Thanks for this question. I'm going to put this on to Helen, just to bring Helen in, who has been integral to this piece of work. Holly said that what does good leadership in implementing the socioeconomic duty look like?
I mean, I was being a little bit jokey when I said we do have a joint publication for that, but we actually do, and I included the link there, about the actual practical steps that we did together, Greater Manchester Poverty Action and Just Fair a couple of years ago. I'd also say, like I said in the chat, please do look at the last 2 pages of the publication because we put in the further reading. We really spent quite a lot of time combing for all the different publications that exist on this. But if you have others we've missed, please send them and we'll add them in. But good leadership is about strong and visible leadership. So it's like Mo was talking about, the people at the very top having to adopt this in order for it to be enacted across an organisation. For us, that was one of the key things to success, was that strong, visible leadership, and also really thinking about ways to ensure that commitment to the duty isn't about a personality, but is something that's structural, because so that if somebody leaves a role, that commitment to the duty doesn't leave with them, that it's not just something about them as a person, but it's something that you're committed to culturally as an organisation. So those would be the main things for me. But also just, I think, like something Shari really emphasised, is about believing in the duty and believing about it being beyond a tick box exercise. That's what will make it so impactful. So if you have that at a leadership level, that gives staff the permission to really push it further and to really explore, like we've seen in these case studies, some really novel and exciting ways that the duty can be used.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Helen. I mean, I can't believe we're almost at 7 o'clock already. So now seems the sort of natural time for me to conclude the questions, and I will formally pass over to Helen in just a second. But just to say thanks from our side for everyone who's joined. There are still a couple of questions coming in. I will try and monitor those, and if you don't get an answer now, I can respond to those in email tomorrow. But I'll just hand over to Helen now to sort of share final reflections and to conclude the session. So thanks, Helen.
Thank you so much for that lovely handover. And so I'm just going to give a few thoughts. I'm not going to keep you long. I wanted to wrap up firstly by saying thanks, first and foremost, to Anna and Megan. They both came to our organisations at really, really early points in their careers, and they just took this project that was the seed of an idea and ran with it. So I'm so excited to see what these two are going to do in the world, because they've already done fantastic things for us. Also want to say a huge thanks to Greater Manchester Poverty Action, because we all know that working with another organisation can be a really complex thing, but this has been nothing but an absolute joy and a really hopeful experience. Also, thanks to the organisations who advised us along the way and gave us all the pointers and signposted us. And in terms of my thanks, far from last is all those workers across England and Wales, like Shari and like Mo, who are day and daily doing this work, but also took the time to tell us their stories, and who saw the value in this project when it was just that seed of an idea, and see the value in the duty, and they shared their expert knowledge and their time so generously. So huge thanks to you, and of course thank you to everybody who came tonight. My favourite thing about the socio-economic duty is the way it can be used as a tool for people to work together to achieve a fairer future within their communities and within wider society. I think the duty calls on all of us to come out of our silos and to pull together to examine what's going wrong, but it also gives us the space to plan together for a better way of doing things. I was really struck by what Mo said about this being really powerful in terms of how it's impacted their recruitment. And I was struck by Shari talking about how they needed to make sure it wasn't a tick box exercise, and that real enthusiasm, passion and drive behind it. The socio-economic duty to me is a tool of optimism, and the process of creating this publication felt a lot like that. We pulled together to try to build a better way forward. We are hoping that the publication we have launched will be another tool that both those working within local government and public authorities, and also those within the third sector, can practically put to work to ensure the socio-economic duty is being used to the best of its potential in all those novel and exciting ways that we've seen. Because it's really, really important that we keep sharing the learning and best practice to achieve that better way of doing things. And Shari and Mo, I'm so sorry if your inboxes blow up after this. The publication is now on both our websites, Just Fair's and Greater Manchester Poverty Action. Please share it widely, and please do get in touch with us. Mine and Laura's email addresses are in that publication if you want to discuss it more, or if you have your own story to tell about how the duties work for you, because we're not ruling out a follow-up publication. So finally, I just want to say thank you all for coming tonight, and really have a wonderful rest of your evening, folks.